Alright folks, let's talk about the International Monetary Fund, or as I like to call it, the world's most controversial piggy bank. Picture this. It's 1944, World War II is winding down, and a bunch of countries decide, hey, maybe we should have a global financial safety net. Enter the IMF, stage left. Its job, to keep the global economy stable and help countries in financial trouble. But it's not that simple. The IMF is like that rich uncle who's always willing to lend you money, but with more strings attached than a marionette factory. And that brings us to our star of the show, Kenya. This East African nation has been in an on-again, off-again relationship with the IMF for decades. Picture Kenya. Beautiful savannas, world-class marathon runners, and an economy that's been on more ups and downs than a yo-yo competition. Kenya's been the golden child of East Africa with a growing tech scene that's earned it the nickname Silicon Savannah. But lately, it's been looking less Silicon Valley and more Death Valley, economically speaking. On paper, it looks great. It's the largest economy in East and Central Africa with a GDP of about $110 billion. But here's the catch. Despite all that potential, about a third of Kenyans still live below the poverty line. One of Kenya's biggest headaches is debt. As of 2023, it's hovering around 70%. The government has been borrowing like there's no tomorrow to fund infrastructure projects. New roads, railways, ports, you name it, they're building it. But all this borrowing and spending hasn't translated into better lives for average Kenyans. Unemployment is high, inflation is rampant, and corruption is widespread. So, Kenya's economy is in hot water, and who comes riding in on a white horse? The IMF, of course. But let's be real, this white horse looks suspiciously like a Trojan horse. In 2021, the IMF approved a $2.34 billion loan program for Kenya. Now, the IMF didn't just hand over this cash and say, have fun. Oh no, they came with a whole shopping list of reforms. The IMF's shopping list for Kenya included things like reducing the public wage bill, reforming state-owned enterprises, and, here's the kicker, increasing tax revenue. The IMF argues that these reforms are necessary to get Kenya's economy back on track. But critics argue that this diet is more like starving the patient. They say the IMF's one-size-fits-all approach doesn't take into account Kenya's unique challenges. And when these policies hit the streets, well, that's when the real fireworks start. Section 4. Tax hikes and street fights. Kenya's summer of discontent. It's the summer of 2023, and Kenya is hotter than a jalapeno eating contest. The government, with a nudge from the IMF, introduces a new tax bill. The Finance Act 2023 was the star of this fiscal drama. It introduced a housing levy, doubled VAT on fuel, and taxed digital transactions. Protests erupted across the country. The message was clear: we can't breathe. The new taxes suffocated an already struggling population. Section 5. Following the money. Is the IMF pulling the strings? Now, here's where we put on our detective hats and follow the money. Is the IMF the puppet master behind Kenya's tax hike drama? It's time for some good old-fashioned investigative comedy. The IMF's loan program for Kenya came with some pretty specific targets. They wanted Kenya to increase its tax to GDP ratio from 13.8% to 15.6% by the 2023-24 fiscal year. To hit this target, Kenya needed to come up with new ways to squeeze more taxes out of its economy. Now, the Kenyan government swears up and down that these tax hikes were their idea. But let's be real. When the IMF says jump, most countries ask, how high? The IMF's recommendations have a funny way of becoming policy, even if they don't directly write the laws. But their policies, filtered through the Kenyan government, created the conditions that led to the protests. Section 6. The verdict: unintended consequences, or calculated chaos. So, what's the verdict? Is the IMF the villain in Kenya's tax hike saga, or just a misunderstood supporting character? The IMF didn't directly cause the protests, but their fingerprints are all over the policies that led to them. The IMF's intentions might be good, but sometimes that medicine has side effects that are worse than the original disease. In Kenya's case, the cure for debt and deficit seems to be causing some serious social and economic indigestion. Maybe it's time for a new approach. Because if the cure is causing this much chaos, it might be time to try a different kind of medicine.